Coming up next, This Week in Computer Hardware, a GPU for the billionaire that has everything. 22 SATA ports and a headphone amp. That's the ASRock Z87 Extreme. It's unhinged. K1 benchmark, ASUS's latest 28-inch 4K UHD monitor, and more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 269, recorded May 29th, 2014. 6,000 Cuda cores. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch's weekly show that aims to bring you the most exciting, most informative, most engaging, and most useful hardware news and the answers to the questions you have about your hardware, whether it's a gaming PC, desktop PC, productivity PC, workstation, or a tablet, or a laptop charger, or maybe even a phone. And I'm just going to go right to Ryan Shrout, ladies and gentlemen, who is astounded at the idea of Steve Ballmer owning the Clippers. Ryan?
Hey, if you got $2 billion to spend, why not do it? I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you could possibly make sure an entire generation of young Americans had, education, learn how to read in kindergarten, or you could buy the Clippers.
I just can't comprehend having that kind of money like that. The idea of having $2 billion is so abstract to me. It's not even really worth considering. Like sure, it's you might as well have bought a box of bubble gum or something in my book.
Yeah. Just close your eyes for a moment and think to yourself, I could own every gaming PC in North America, or I could buy half of Australia, or I could buy a sports team, and that's what it feels like to be a billionaire.
Sounds nice.
Email from Australia. I should point out, by the way, if you feel like emailing us, Twitch, TWICH @twit.tv is the email address. And ladies and gentlemen, Ryan and Patrick's obsession with 4K monitors continues. This time, however, with the ASUS PB287Q 4K UHD 28-inch monitor review, which I think begs the question, ladies and gentlemen, is 28 inches too small for 4K? Is that breadth enough for you, Ryan?
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. It's a good lead-in. I like it.
Thank you.
I would say, it's kind of towards the end of the discussion is that, it kind of is maybe too small. It depends on what your goal of 4K is. If your goal of 4K is higher pixel density and sharper images and sharper text and things like that, then 4K at 28 inches is perfect. If your goal is more screen real estate, if it's to have more windows or more tabs or more, usable sections of Photoshop or Premiere on the screen at any given time, it can definitely do that. The problem with the 28-inch form factor is that each pixel in a 4K panel is very, 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 very small. And I found that using a 28-inch monitor at 4K resolution at a standard kind of desk distance from where you're sitting and leaving scaling at 100% like at default is kind of difficult, right? And I'm 32 years old. I don't have the best eyes in the world, but I don't have the worst eyes in the world. And I can see how it would be troublesome for many, many people leaving that at 100%.
Right. I thought it was interesting. We had this, we still actually have it for another week or two, this incredible 4K, dual 290X gaming machine from Puget Systems. Did a review of that up on Texilobytes, along with the ASUS PQ321 monitor. And the thing that kind of struck me was Windows 8 did a pretty good job at scaling things, and you get into apps and you'd be like, because you'd be back and forth, because I was sitting there and I'm like, I have 6 full-size windows open. I can look at, huge swaths of like 12,000 dot per inch, or 12,000 pixel photos. And then you'd be like, and I cannot figure out a word of that sentence in that app because that app isn't scaling. And it's peculiar to kind of go back and forth.
It seems odd. Like, so Internet Explorer 11 scales great. Like so the solution to not running at 100% scaling is to say run at 125 or 150. Windows 8.1 actually added improvements to that. Most of those improvements revolve around having the ability to have multiple scaling resolutions multiple scaling percentages rather across different displays. Like if you have a 4K as part of a multi-screen configuration, that works. But if you scale it up to 150%, which is what I felt was more comfortable, you know, you lose some of the advantage of real estate. You can't put as many windows on the screen as you would have at 100%, but everything else looks nicer. Internet Explorer 11 looked great. Text obviously scaled perfectly. It was nice and clear and sharp. Images depended on, you know, like the website you were viewing. Were they using high DPI images, or were they using, you know, what most people are used to using on the internet, which is fairly low resolution JPEGs that are, you know, 600 pixels wide or 800 pixels wide at, you know, I don't know, 60 to 72 DPI. Those start to look a little fuzzy. But even applications like Chrome, right, which is I use every day, and I think most of our audience probably uses every day, does not scale correctly with its default settings out of the box, right? Like if you look at text on Chrome versus text on Internet Explorer 11 side by side, which we showed in our story, like Chrome is fuzzy and it's not sharp and it's not clear. And apparently there are some hacks around it. Like if you, because basically I think what Chrome is doing is it's trying to use its own internal scaling engine instead of the Windows scaling engine. And so you have to go into the deep dive settings where you kind of enter it in the address bar and change, you know, disable applications scaling and enable, you know, Windows scaling. And it gets pretty complicated. It's something that I don't think people should have to do that. And then there's a program like Fraps, which I've used for decades, essentially. And when you increase its scaling, it freaks out. It has no idea what's going on. It's doubling up. Like the background images are obviously a fixed size, and it starts to like double them up, and you see images inside of images inside of images that wouldn't normally exist. So that was like the worst case scenario for it. But I think for the most part, people are getting it. They are adjusting and updating, much as they did when Retina displays and high density displays came to phones and tablets, right? There was a little bit of a adjustment time for that, for sure.
So it's a TN panel, but you make note that it actually looks better than any. Well, actually, I'm going to quote you. Probably looks better than any other TN monitor you have ever seen before.
Yeah, I mean, it's a TN monitor based on how it's technologically built, but it has better viewing angles and less color shifting until you hit extreme viewing angles than I think most TN panels have had, right? And we go through a lot of monitors here, and depending on my mood that day, if we're buying an expensive IPS panel or a cheap TN panel, depending on what the use case is, so we've had our fair experiences with it. And we saw these monitors at CES, and people like Alan and Josh, who are more particular about their displays than I am, came away fairly impressed, right? You can definitely tell the difference between this monitor and a good IPS screen, or what is it, PLS, which is kind of I think it's Samsung's equivalent of IPS. Viewing angles your color is going to shift. Things are going to look different. And it's a big enough screen that if you sit close enough to it, you may see color shifting in the corners. Right. So it's something to keep in mind. If you are somebody asked me on Twitter today, if I am an IPS monitor snob, should I buy this monitor? And I'd probably say no. If you are self-identifying as a IPS panel snob, then you're going to be much more particular than I think a lot of people are going to be. And that's unfortunate because everything else about this monitor is great. The resolution's great. The price is great. It's $650. It'll be available on June 10th at that price. And the stand on it is way better than the Samsung we talked about a few weeks ago. It has the ability to height adjust. It has the ability to angle adjust. It has the ability to twist into portrait mode. It has a VESA mount. All of those things are options that the Samsung did not have, which is, you know, a big step up. And it's $50 less than the Samsung is currently selling for. So, you know, the screens between the two monitors are identical, essentially, but everything else around them is different. You know, different stand, different bezel, different OSD, on-screen display, different kind of interface, but all the technologically based features are the same. You still get picture-in-picture, you still get picture-by-picture, and you still get 4K at 60 hertz, which is obviously the most important feature there. I love the monitor, although it is something like you can tell that it's a TN monitor. If you've only ever used TN monitors, it's not going to be a big change for you. If you're doing mostly gaming, if you're excited about gaming on it, you know, because of the variable color palette of most games, you would be hard pressed to see the color shifting. It's really when you're looking at like when you first open Photoshop and you get a solid gray color across the entire screen, you're going to see that that gray kind of changes in brightness levels towards the corners and the edges. And, you know, that's I kind of par for the course, right? But like I said, it's a little bit better than what we've seen before. I don't know. It's trust me, I wish this was an IPS panel for 650, but we haven't really seen an IPS. Well, the next step up from this is that ASUS PQ321 monitor, and it's $2,400 still, right? So that's your price difference to get up to that monitor that has the improved screen quality.
A mere $1,750 more. Well, while we're talking about 4K, you know, no, it's interesting. I'll be curious to see if we have any worthy $500 4K monitors by the holiday shopping season. And I also have this funny feeling that for the bulk of consumers that are going to just skip over, you know, the 2560 by 1440 monitors and go straight to 4K. That would be strange, but I have this funny feeling that just because of television resolutions, that's going to happen. While we're talking about 4K, Acer has announced the world's first 4K display with Nvidia G-Sync technology, or as I affectionately like to say, it's not dead yet. Cue cranky emails to me from Nvidia. Sebastian wrote this up for PC Per. Quote, we've been talking about the benefits of 4K for a while, most recently with the Samsung U28D 590D, which added single stream 60 hertz support to the mix, but there have certainly been some drawbacks of 4K monitors to date. You know, it's funny. It's a 4K monitor with integrated NVIDIA G-Sync technology, 28-inch display, and the idea is it's going to minimize stutter and eliminate tearing, which sound ideal for high-res gaming, as Sebastian notes. Or you could just turn on V-Sync. Because, you know, unless you have $1,300 worth of cards, you're probably not going to really be jamming the refresh rate up that high. Are you excited for G-Sync on 4K displays, or is it just eh? Yeah,
no, actually, I think to be perfectly honest, I think G-Sync makes more sense on this panel than it does on a 1080p panel. Okay. Because the advantage of G-Sync is that it can show you images and without horizontal tearing at any refresh rate, right? It doesn't have to be 60 and it doesn't have to be a multiple of 60, right? It doesn't have to be 60 or 30 or 60 to 90 or anything like that. And so if you're gaming at 4K, chances are you're going to be gaming at lower frame rates than anybody else would, right? So even if you have a pair of 780 Ti cards or you have an R9 295X2, the chances of you ranging between the 40 to 60 frames per second mark is going to be pretty good. And so its ability to show you those images cleanly between 60 and 40 or 60 and 30, I think would actually improve performance or improve the experience quite a bit of 4K gaming, right? So when we in that article for the PB287Q that I wrote, I just threw a handful of benchmarks in there just to see. And the GTX 780 Ti and SLI, you know, hit Battlefield 4 at ultra presets at about 47 frames per second, Metro Last Light at like 40, and Crysis 3 at like 47 frames per second. So those are the ones that if you had VSync enabled, would produce the most instances of kind of 112, 112, 112 patterns that presents this kind of juddery effect on the screen that, you know, I don't want to dive into too much, but if viewers or readers aren't familiar with what NVIDIA G-Sync is, they should look that up and kind of what it tries to prevent. Right. And so that's actually ideal, right? Because one of the things we had was when we got that 1080p monitor, we were able to game over 60 hertz fairly frequently and fairly easily. So the biggest benefit of G-Sync happens around 60 and just below 60 hertz. So I think this monitor would potentially be a great solution or a great implementation of G-Sync. I just worry that it's either going to be like they're going to show it at Computex next week, and then what? Is it 3 months out and $200 more expensive, or is it, you know, 3 weeks out and $100 more expensive? Like that really makes a big a difference in kind of how all this is going to be received.
Given that there was no picture with the release, I suspect it may be a little farther out than you might want.
Probably, yeah.
Hey, what's going on with the whole Nvidia AMD Gameworks fight?
Okay, so some of this is like inside baseball. So I'm gonna give it on a high level thing. And if people are really interested in the cat fights that happen between AMD and Nvidia, they should go read this editorial that I posted yesterday. Essentially, what it is Nvidia Gameworks is a middleware application that the company started releasing last year. And a middleware application is something that a game developer uses to quickly implement features into a game without them having to spend all the work developing it themselves. So you might implement middleware for an artificial intelligence system, or you might introduce middleware for a foliage generation or something like that, right? To include in your engine so that you can just easily generate foliage or add artificial intelligence without having to come up with all that yourself, right? So lots of third-party companies do this. Gameworks is one invented by NVIDIA that has features like HBAO, which is an ambient occlusion algorithm, right, which improves shadowing and lighting effects. They have Hairworks, they have Faceworks, they have Waveworks, right, that obviously affect those particular things as they would indicate. And several Gameworks titles have been released. Those are titles that implement Gameworks in them. And the most recent one is Watch Dogs, which came out this past week. And the problem that it kind of created is that AMD and people who are fans of AMD became fearful that because NVIDIA was controlling this middleware, they could possibly artificially deflate AMD, artificially deflate AMD performance, or, make it difficult for developers to properly optimize the code for AMD hardware. Right? Now, conspiracy theorists love this type of stuff, right? It sets up perfectly for that, right? You've got the arch enemy creating the software package that a game developer's integrated, and lo and behold, when the game comes out, it actually performs better on NVIDIA hardware than it does on AMD hardware. So, AMD and Ubisoft or NVIDIA and Ubisoft are working together and all this stuff. And actually, a story came out on a Forbes blog that kind of said, hey, Gameworks is really bad for PC gaming, and it's this is really bad for not just AMD users, but for the industry as a whole going forward. And so I talked with AMD about it, I talked with NVIDIA about it, and it turned out to be much less dramatic than it was made out to be. That NVIDIA does now allow developers access to the source code for Gameworks. So if they want to change something, if there's performance deficits on AMD, they absolutely can do that. And I think AMD gets a pass, right? AMD invented Mantle. They created Mantle. They're essentially pushing developers to develop for a third API. And it's not all that different than what Gameworks is doing. The primary difference is that Mantle doesn't run on NVIDIA cards, and several parts of Gameworks will run on AMD cards. So the differences are there. But I think, AMD created Mantle as an API because they wanted to be a catalyst for change in the industry. They wanted to say, hey, we think you guys should take low overhead, you should put more emphasis on it. And it did, and it pushed people to develop DirectX 12 a little bit quicker. NVIDIA claims to be doing the same thing with Gameworks. They say, hey, developers don't have time to think up how to make really cool flames or really cool waves or really cool hair implementation. So we built these tools, and if they want to use it, awesome, right? And if it makes games better, great. And if they choose to say, hey, your flames look awesome in the FlameWorks tool, but we don't want to cut out the 35% of the market that's AMD, so we're going to make our own, but we're going to model it after yours. They say, hey, that's fine. We're just pushing things forward, right? NVIDIA, of all of the companies, wants PC gaming to survive and be, vibrant, because they're not in the consoles, right? If they want to survive and be dominant in GPU sales, they need to make sure PC gaming has an advantage, and that advantage would be image quality and performance and features. So, neither of these companies, these are still corporations. They still have their own best interest at heart. Right, Mantle was not created purely altruistically. Neither was Gameworks. If it helps them get some more market share and some more profit margin, they'll definitely take it. But it's not the end of the gaming PC gaming ecosystem as kind of that original Forbes story would have had you believe.
And there, ladies and gentlemen, you have the short version
That
of
is the short
cat
version, so
fight.
think
I
about
also want to point out that was tagged cat fight under the tagged section.
I thought that was funny. Yeah.
I thought that was awesome. Nvidia Tegra K1 benchmark spotted. Scott wrote this up for PC Per. I could say that with consonants this time. Scott wrote that up for PCPer.com, consonants and a .com. Quote, the Chinese tech site Evo Live required a few benchmarks for the Tegra K1. We do not know exactly where they got the system from, but we know it has 4 gigs of RAM, 12 gigs of storage. Of course, this is the version with 4 ARM Cortex A15 cores, not the upcoming 64-bit version based on Project Denver. On 3D Mark Ice Storm Unlimited, it was capable of 25,737 points full system. So you might remember, Scott points out in our test with an Intel Core i5-3317U Ivy Bridge back in September, it achieved a score of 25,630 on 3D Mark Ice Storm. That was using, of course, the built-in Intel HD 4000 graphics, not a discrete solution, but it still kept up for gaming. So it's kind of crazy that the K1 is hanging with a Core i5, or am I just, you know, I don't know. I find that fascinating. What's essentially a mobile part is hanging that hard. I would also point out that later this year, we will have the next generation Intel processors that will probably kick the snot out of the existing Core i5 Haswell CPU, at least in terms of graphics performance. What are you thinking? I mean, it's kind of crazy, right?
It is. What I would like to know is what the power consumption of this part is. They don't really get into that. When I went and was briefed on the Tegra K1 part, like we knew it was going to be pretty cool stuff, and it continues to look that way, but we still have not seen any systems integrated, phones, tablets, a new Shield device. Actually, there was one tablet that integrated it, but it's not actually out yet. And it's impressive to see that performance, but I'd be more impressed if I knew it were doing that at a reasonable power consumption level that would make it feasible to include in a tablet, right? That both doesn't burn your hands off and has battery life longer than a typical gaming laptop. So there's still more. It's uplifting information for NVIDIA, but it's not in any way complete in order to make like a solid case for that part overall.
We wait, ladies and gentlemen, with bated breath. And while we're talking about waiting with bated breath, rumor, new Intel Core i7 Haswell-E processor specs allegedly leaked. Sebastian wrote this one up for PC Per. Chinese site Cuda claims to have the specs on the new Haswell-E CPUs. Ryan, do the specs look solid for this?
Yeah,
8 cores on the. Okay. 20 megabytes of cache, 8 cores on the Core i7-5960X. Then there's the Core i7-5930K and the Core i7-5820K. 20 megabytes of cache, 100 megahertz in the BLK, 3 gigahertz for the core, 1.2 gigahertz for the core minimum frequency on that 59.
You totally banged your computer. The camera.
I can't hear a word you're saying, Burke.
Tilt your monitor down. Thank you. You smacked it right in before you started talking about this.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I was so involved in my performance on Twitch. I was so engaged in the incredible, ridiculous, over-the-top specs for the Core i7-5960X. Should we pick it up from the beginning of the story? Or just pick it up at the specs?
From the beginning would be good.
Okay. Rumor, new Intel Core i7 Haswell-E processor specs allegedly leaked. Sebastian wrote this up for PC Per. Also, Chinese site Cuda claims to have the specs on the new Haswell-E CPUs. I'm just kind of staring at the Core i7-5960X, 8 processor cores, hyper-threaded, 20 megabytes of cache, base frequency at 3 gigahertz, minimum frequency at 1.2 gigahertz, DDR4 for memory, 2,133 megahertz on the memory controller frequency, no ECC memory, so you can't use it for a free NAS box. That's an inside joke, people. 140 watt parts. Do these specs sound legitimate?
Yeah, they're probably pretty accurate. I mean, at this point, Intel's already said that Haswell-E was coming. They've given us general idea that it's going to support DDR4. So these clock speeds and stuff are, I don't know, they could be off within a couple of 100 megahertz either way. But this is more than likely. I don't think they'll hit 10 cores or 12 cores, which is what you see in the super high-end Xeon lines, just because of, trying to keep their product segmentation the way it is. But 8 cores is nice. I mean, we're going from, let's see, what's the 4960 and the 3960? Those parts are 6-core processors, so we're getting 2 additional cores with the highest end parts.
We like that.
Yeah, although I'd have to check and see what the frequencies of. Actually, I'm kind of curious now. The Core i7 4970X, I think that came out. That's a thing, right? Yep,
That's a thing.
That's a 3.6 gigahertz part. So if these specs are true, you don't have a part that's at that high of a frequency listed here.
Right.
Even the 6-core part kind of stops at is peaked at 3.5, but it is DDR4, so there will be some change there. Although I don't think performance delta is going to be super dramatic. It never is with the first generation of a new memory technology. But you do, if these are correct, you lose 500 megahertz on the base clock going from 6 cores to 8 cores. So that's the 5960X won't definitely be the fastest part anymore.
Right. Even
though it has more cores, it's if what you're doing is only lightly threaded, 1, 2, 3, 4 core or threads or whatever, the less expensive part would be faster at it. So I think this time around, if this holds true, we'll have maybe easier decision making for upgraders, right? So if you play games mostly and you're doing general computing, the 5930K would be your better choice. It's going to save you money. Whereas if you're doing encoding and editing and some heavy multi-threaded application work, then the 5960 might be the better option. So if that holds true, at least.
If that holds true.
Yeah.
So while we're talking about, I guess actually there's one last NVIDIA story before we go. The GeForce GTX Titan Z graphics card. I'm going to click on the Amazon link and you will hear me gasp when I look at the price on this card. Ladies and gentlemen, I will click on the link from Amazon and you will hear me gasp when I see the price on this card. Oh my goodness. Only 8 left in stock. No, yeah, a big surprise there. It's a $3,000 GPU, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say that one more time. That's a $3,000 GPU. But it's more than a GPU, Ryan. It's a supercomputer in a slot.
It's 2 GPUs, technically.
3 slots. Yeah. GDDR5, 12 gigabytes of GDDR5, 768-bit dual-link DVI. So I should totally get this for 4K gaming, right?
Hey, if you've got a ton of money, yeah, absolutely, you should.
You've just bought the Clippers, and now it's time to buy yourself 2 EVGA GeForce GTX Titan Z.
They have a model
GPUs.
that's $200 more expensive if you want to get the slightly overclocked SKU as well. It's $31.99 instead of $29.99. So
am I going to need to upgrade the cooler on that to get the maximum performance?
I hope not.
5,760 cores.
Yep. Yep. I mean, don't get me wrong. The performance of this card is going to be fantastic. But what's interesting is NVIDIA announced this card in March at their GPU Technology Conference. It's supposed to be available at the end of April. They were late. And I think part of the reason they were late is they were trying to figure out what they could do in response to AMD's Radeon R9 295X2, which came out in April, like early April. And that card was a dual Hawaii dual GPU graphics card beast. And it's $1,500, right? And that was already very expensive. But I would wager that the Titan Z is going to be slower than the R9 295X2 in almost all cases, right? Because the 290X is or the 290 based GPUs that are in the 295X2 are actually running higher frequency than the single GPU cards, whereas this card is running, it's running at a base clock of 705 megahertz, while the Titan Black, which is the same GPU, is actually running at 889 megahertz. So almost 200 megahertz difference in clock speed, which is a lot when you're talking about a GPU. And that was obviously for them, like they're not using an external water cooler. This is, I think, a better looking graphics card. It's kind of like a more, it looks more like a $3,000 product would look. I don't know what that means exactly, but it looks like a sexy piece of hardware.
I know what it means.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, sorry. I was going to say, like, some parts you look at and no, I mean, some parts you look at, you're like $3,000 for that.
Yeah.
No, I'm actually still going to say it. $3,000 for that.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's so, you know, they talk. If you look at some of their promotional videos, they talk about it for gaming purposes, and with 6 gigs of frame buffer per card per GPU rather, it would be great for 4K gaming. Like, you're not going to have a frame buffer issue if you want to do 4K surround. Right? You know, you could do that now at $650. If you're buying a $3,000 video card, buying $1,800 to $1,900 worth of monitors doesn't sound that stupid anymore, right? So if you're going to get 3 of those ASUS PB287Q monitors, that might be beneficial. But I think they didn't send these out for review. Like, I didn't get one in for review. I don't think anybody got one in for review. And I think that's mostly because they're worried that, you know, it's going to not look favorable to them. And when they announced it in March, they'd already announced the price. So they kind of put themselves in an odd spot where they either had to lower the price to kind of come close to matching what AMD had done and try to save face while not saying, oh, no company wants to say, well, we only did this because AMD forced us to. So they're kind of targeting this more again towards the high-end Cuda developer, somebody who is using Cuda development for GPU applications, somebody that is maybe at an educational institution that doesn't want to buy a bunch of Tesla video cards or Tesla cards or something like that. They want to do some, you know, development work on GPU computing. They can buy this, and you know, that kind of audience. $3,000 for a card is not really outside the norm, right? Quadro cards and Fire Pro cards and Tesla cards are traditionally $2,000 to $6,000, so it would fit in there. So we'll see kind of how they push forward. There may be one of these on its way to me soon to do some testing on in a let me borrow that for a little bit kind of way. We'll see. Please. Yeah. The one thing that disappoints me is if you look at the card, the faceplate of it, it's a 3-slot card, right? Like, it's enormous. Right. But it still only has 1 DisplayPort connection. Okay, which means you can only do 1 4K monitor on this.
That's it? Just 1 4K monitor?
Yeah, like if you're buying a $3,000 video card, this is the person that's going to have multiple 4K monitors, right? And so it seems
there's logic there.
It seems crazy that you would, like, for again a $3,000 investment that you would hopefully have for more than, you know, several months. Maybe you'd have it for 2 or 3 years, and you know, you can't run a 4K 60 hertz monitor off of a dual link DVI connection or an HDMI connection. So that's kind of an odd spot to be in too. So if you want to run 2 4K monitors at 60 hertz, you have to have 2 Titan Zs. So think about that. Now you're talking about $6,000 worth of video cards.
Sorry, all I can hear is like Vizzini's voice in my head from The Princess Bride going, inconceivable. Yeah, I would like to game on that person's system. So, Mr. Ballmer, after you've bought the Clippers and your $3,000 card with 6,000 cores and your multiple 4K monitors, invite Ryan and I over to game. You know, in the strange but never-ending tale of Intel's unfortunately named Atom, and I say unfortunately named Atom because it's actually a pretty cool chip now, despite the fact that it has an association with the netbooks you never want to touch again, although it turns out those netbooks you never want to touch again with 1 gigabyte of RAM run pretty well with Windows 8. Intel announces a partnership with the Rockchip to produce low-cost x86...
Wait, sorry. You're totally scraping, like, the cable. Something's, like, dragging across the mic cable.
Okay.
Like, yeah, like all that. Cool. Sorry. It will be torture to the audio listeners. Sorry to interrupt the flow.
Jeez, Burke.
Hey, Burke, can you turn your levels up on that mic a little bit? Because I am actually having enormous difficulties hearing you.
I did. It's even louder than this.
That's better.
Yeah, I boosted it all the way. I know you couldn't hear me last time.
You are slightly soft-spoken, sir.
And I am very soft-spoken on top of that.
Talk like a producer, for God's sake.
Okay, go. Wait.
Wait.
Oh, look, see, that even hurt my voice, even being that loud.
Where were we?
Right into this Intel story.
Yeah, I know. I just don't remember how I got into it. In 3, 2, Intel announces a partnership with Rockchip to produce low-cost x86 Atom system on a chip. So is this the new cool Atom or the old horrendous Atom, Ryan?
It's really weird, Adam. So I don't know if most people are familiar with what Rockchip is. It's an ARM. It's typically been an ARM SoC vendor that focuses on China markets. They focus on kind of like mainstream low cost parts to get into the $50 to $100 to $150 kind of form factors of tablets and probably phones as well. But they're very, very big and very, very profitable in that part of the country. And Intel is partnering with them to build an x86 core SoC so it'll have Intel x86 cores in it and an Intel 3G modem. And then other graphics technology, other memory technologies, things like that. But Rockchip is actually going to be kind of taking this IP and making an SoC out of it. And then it'll be manufactured at TSMC, not at Intel's fabs. And then it will be sold as under the Intel brand, but through Rockchip's channels, right? Like, so into the low cost channel markets and partnerships that they're used to dealing with. It's a very odd, potentially earth-shattering, maybe that's probably overspeaking it a little bit, partnership in that, Intel is no longer in. We kind of knew this was going to happen, that they were going to have the ability to license out their core IP, and this is the kind of the first instance of it. And it's also interesting to me that even though Rockchip is making the SoC and distributing it and selling it, it's going to be branded as an Intel part. That's part of the power you have when you're Intel, I guess. So I'm curious what kind of part this will be, what kind of performance it will have and efficiency it will have. It's going after the ARM ecosystem directly and trying to get into those super low cost parts, the high volume but low margin parts. And I don't really know what the point of it is, because they're doing it through one of ARM's bigger partners in the Asia market, right? So it's not like Rockchip is dropping ARM from their portfolio completely and going strictly with Intel parts. But maybe Intel feels like they need a proof point to showcase to these other SoC vendors that, hey, you can do this with our parts. It's also odd to me that it's essentially Intel saying that either they don't have the time or the ability to design their own SoC for that market, or maybe they've done it many times and all of those partners over there say, nah, we're happy with who we got. So it could be that they're buying into the relationship side of things that Rockchip has and trying to force their the x86 ecosystem out there. I don't know. It's very odd kind of combination of partnerships and IP and things like that. I'll be very curious to see when this comes out, what it is. Like, is it going to perform favorably against what Rockchip would have otherwise produced in those low cost mainstream markets? I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. I almost wonder if it's a sign of the level of desperation Intel has at this point to break into the mobile market in a really meaningful way. I don't know. curious stuff. Twitch, TDYCH at twit.tv is the email address, at Ryan Shrout and at Patrick Norton if you are a Twitter kind of human being. We got an email from Gareth about the M.2. He says, love the show. Thanks for the opportunity to keep up with the world of computer hardware when I'm often too busy to sit down and read for long periods. Your lifesavers or job savers in any case. Well, thank you, Gareth. He says, on to the question. I've been looking at some Lenovo laptops. For example, I want to say a U-series on the cheap end of things for my sister-in-law. Lenovo seems to be doing a lot of systems with hard drives and small caching SSDs, which I figure could be easily swapped out for a boot drive. But it turns out rather than using M-SATA for these SSDs, Lenovo has gone with M.2 drives, and damned if I can find larger capacity drives to replace these with. Are these ever coming, or is M.2 turned into a bit of a dead end with the advent of mobile PCIe drives? Oh boy.
I think M.2 is definitely has not turned into a dead end, as he says here. If anything, it's actually just now starting to take off as a thing. Yeah. If you paid attention to the Z97 motherboard launch, almost all of those motherboards will have SATA Express or M.2 or both integrated support on it. And with that, I think you will see maybe not an explosion, but an increase in availability of M.2 drives. And it's interesting because M.2 as a form factor can support both the SATA interface or the PCI Express interface. And that will actually, that is not easily known if you just are looking at a unit necessarily, or you know that it has a spec of an M.2 port. Some M.2 ports, well, all the M.2 ports that I've seen on Z97 motherboards will support PCI Express-based SSDs and M-SATA. But the first generations of M.2 only did SATA. Like, they only supported the SATA interface. And it's the only way you can tell by looking at the module is that it's keyed slightly differently. I am guessing if the U430, if there's something he's already had, he's had for a little bit of time, that he probably has an M.2 interface that only supports SATA, which isn't bad. Like, you'll be able to find SATA-based M.2 drives for sure. I'm not sure what kind of capacity he has or what he's looking for.
I mean, you're not going to find it's at this point it's like Crucial's got like a 120 and a 240 gigabytes. Intel's got a 530 series 180 gigabyte that sells for like $180. So it's kind of funny that it's just, if you haven't seen one, it's worth actually searching out, because essentially it looks like a DIMM, except instead of the pins being on the long side, they're on the short side.
Yeah, if I put a link in there, there's a Crucial M500 that is a 480 gig.
Oh wow,
M.2, right? And
is it still like $1 a gigabyte?
No, it's only $259, which is, that's not bad. It's not as good as the SATA, like the SATA version, but it's actually pretty good. And so you can also see on that link that they have the 240 gig version for $130, right? So I think you can. Now the only other thing to keep in mind with M.2 is the length of that module. I can't remember the 3 different options, but there are 3 different options. Does it say on here maybe what it is under the specs or something? No, not very detailed specs. But if you look at motherboards that have M.2 support, you'll see that there are 3 different positions for screws to hold those down, and they're for 3 different lengths of M.2 card. And it's just to, allow flexibility, right? You can see at the end of that, there's like a little half of a screw hole. No, in the middle there. Yeah, there you go. And it, that's what it would attach to at the end of it. So you need to make sure what length that laptop has support for. It may only be the smallest one, or it could be all 3. And make sure that you are buying an M.2 module that is capable to, that will fit in there, right? Obviously. I mean, you could always just tape it down. I wouldn't recommend it, but make sure that's compatibility. And that's a problem when you're upgrading laptops, is documentation is sometimes hard to come by without ripping open the machine.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it just flat out doesn't exist, period. which can be immensely frustrating. We got another question. Richard writes in, "Hi boys, can you do a review of the ASRock Z87 Extreme 11 AC? I'm working through an upgrade to consolidate my desktop 3 Lian Li EX501s into a Cosmos 2 tower with a Silverstone CFP51. Also thinking of going Crossfire at some point. Currently have a Sapphire 280X. Yes, I have a 1500 watt Silverstone power supply. Would like to know what you think of the reliability of the 11AC. Can you tell me if the motherboard would support something like an external Chenbro CK23601 36-port SAS expander card through one of the SAS 3 ports? Also, have you heard if this board will be brought forward for X99 at Broadwell, or if there is anything comparable? Many SAS SATA ports, PCIe Express 16 slots." Oh boy. You know, I think, and I could be wrong, Ryan. I love watching your face when it does that. I think this may be the first time we've ever discussed SAS 3 on the show.
It might be, yeah. I have to look up here what a Lian Li EX501 is. And it doesn't Google very well, apparently. That is it's like an external USB. It's like an external multi-drive hard drive mount. I see. Okay. Hence the need for a 36. Did he say 36 port?
Well, let me. If you've never looked up the ASRock Z87 Extreme 11 AC, let me point this out. This is a $530 motherboard that has 22 SATA 3 ports. Now, I am a freak of nature. I built a machine with like 9, Blu-ray and DVD drives to rip CDs like simultaneously. Even I am slightly awed and frightened by the idea of 22 SATA 3 ports. That said, if you're doing something like a monster FreeNAS box, it starts getting really compelling. Motherboard supports 4-channel dual-port Thunderbolt 2 technology, pretty much all the socket 1150s processors, 4x PCIe, 3 X16 slots. VGA output, HDMI, DisplayPort in, 2x mini DisplayPort, Thunderbolt 2, dual gigabit LAN with teaming, built-in 7.1 channel HD audio. Merely a single eSATA port, 2 mSATA, 12 USB 3.0 ports, 7 USB 2.0. I mean, this is the motherboard for the woman or man that wants all the connectivity. It's just a lot of motherboard, dude.
I can't believe I didn't know this was a thing. I'm a little bit disappointed in myself. 22.
Yeah.
So you got your normal 6 SATA 6 connectors, and then a buttload, if you will, of SAS connectors. So what was? I got to get back to the original question here. What was the question?
Also, an onboard headphone amplifier. I mean, this is an insane motherboard. So,
what do you think about the reliability of 11 AC? There's our first question. We can answer that one pretty easy. I have had no problem with 802.11ac. Don't expect.
I think he means the Z87 Extreme, the ASRock Z87 Extreme 11AC.
Just of the board of itself.
I'm guessing, I mean, call me crazy. I think the one thing this board doesn't have is actually, does it have Wi-Fi on board? It has everything else. There is I see a kitchen sink.
If it's named the 11AC, I'm going to guess it has 802.11ac.
Yep, dual band 802.11ac Wi-Fi plus Bluetooth 4.0. No more sluggish internet, kids. Okay, if you go to the ASRock webpage, it shows a picture of the 22 SATA 3 ports, which is just unbelievable. You were saying though.
So I don't have any personal experience with this motherboard, so I can't tell you anything about the reliability of it. The best thing I can tell you is that the 5 people that purchased it at Newegg gave it pretty good reviews, right? I don't expect a huge amount of people to own this motherboard because of its price, but there's that. Amazon doesn't have any reviews of it. Chances are there are not a whole lot of people that have the need for that many storage data connections. Maybe Alan is one of them, but not very many more than that. 16 SAS 3 SATA 3 ports.
I'm just excited by that. And a headphone and a nice headphone amplifier.
Yeah. And then he asks about supporting the Chinbro 36-port SAS expander card through one of the SAS 3 ports. Although my understanding of that Chinbro card is that it is a PCI Express add-in card, not something that actually plugs into. Oh wait, nope, I'm wrong. That's just to give it something to sit in. That's not actually a PCI Express connector on the bottom there. That's just dead PCB. So I don't know the answer to that. I would assume that it would work, but I hate to claim that for sure. That'd be something I would bet if you contacted Chinbro support, they'd be able to answer that, because this seems like a motherboard that they have interfaced with before.
Yeah, that's man. I hope you need all that motherboard, because, man, that's a lot of money for a motherboard.
He's trying to consolidate. He has 3 Lian Li EX501s. My guess is those each hold 5 hard drives. So if he's got 3 of them, he's got at least 15 hard drives plus whatever he has in his desktop. So if you need data connectivity, damn it, you need data connectivity. And he does have a 1500 watt power supply for his potential of going crossfire graphics cards.
Props to Burke for the shot of the data tower there. Yeah, no. Richard, I want to thank you for bringing that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry? Yeah, I want to thank you for bringing that motherboard to our attention.
Yeah, I might have to. I wonder if they're going to make a Z97 version of it with like SATA Express integrated in there and M.2, and you can have every possible storage connectivity option. Maybe add SCSI to it. That's still a thing, maybe. He also asks if the board will be brought forward for X99 or Broadwell, or if there's anything comparable. I don't know of anything comparable to that right now. And obviously, I don't know about the X99 option, the Z97 option, even for that matter. So
that would be a question for ASRock.
Yeah, we're not that. Computex is next week. Maybe this is something we'll pay attention for a motherboard or another motherboard vendor or ASRock themselves to kind of announce or talk about a ridiculously expandable Z97 or X99 motherboard. I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but at Computex, these types of things happen where motherboard companies will accidentally have X99 motherboards out on their show space as well. So we'll keep an eye out on that too. So.
In case you didn't hear that, Ryan said accidentally.
Yes. Yeah. My tonality was supposed to indicate air quotes, and I didn't even do them for people on the video. Accidentally have X99. They'll accidentally have them out there for 4 days. So something to that.
With a little sign describing some of the more obscure features. Man, that is an insane motherboard. And I'm going to say it. Let's call it on that $530 motherboardy note. Ryan, what's coming up on PC Per this week? Anything you can talk about?
Yeah, we're doing some more Watch Dogs testing. I hope to have a GeForce GTX Titan Z in for testing. Alan is testing a couple of new storage options. Crucial's going to have an X100. They've already pre-announced will be launching at Computex, and Intel will have a PCIe SSD launching at Computex. So we have some storage stuff to talk about next week. So we may have Alan guest spot in with us here. Now that we're in the same area, we might be able to do that. And be able to have 2 on this side at Twitch. That would be kind of crazy. But yeah, lots going on.
Die trying this week. I made bacon from pork belly. I have learned how to cure pork and turn it into the magic that is bacon. I will probably be 300 pounds by the end of this year, but they will be the happiest 70 pounds I put on. Just saying. Actually, goodness, bunch of announcements next week that are already hitting, so we'll be talking about those on Texabytes next week. Hey, Computex, I feel excited about Computex this year, and I don't even know why. That's all I'm going to say. Well, I do know why, but I'm still not going to say. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so much for listening to our podcast. This is This Week in Computer Hardware, aka Twitch. You can find us at twit.tv/Twitch. You can download us on a favorite podcaster. You can listen to us off the website. And as we mentioned before, you can tweet at us at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton. Thank each and every one of you for listening. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.